Is sport out of politics? Why did Ukraine decide to prohibit its athletes from participating in competitions where Russians participate? You're listening to the Solutions from Ukraine podcast, which is brought to you by the Rubryka media outlet. My name is Vladyslav Faraponov. I'm the co-host of this podcast. I'm happy to be joined by my colleague Anastasia Rudenko, who is editor-in-chief of the independent all-Ukrainian Rubryka media outlet. And before we start, let me remind you that you can support us at Patreon, at patreon.com/Rubryka. After you join us at Patreon, you'll be able to send questions that we address in this podcast, and also you can get a merch of Rubryka. So hello Nastya, and welcome to our podcast.
Thank you for having me.
So today we'll talk about the decision of Ukraine's authorities to prohibit its athletes from participating in the competitions where actually Russians are going to participate as well. And why did Kyiv make such a decision, Nastya?
Well, first of all, this is a case when numbers matter. 262 Ukrainian athletes have already died, and more than 350 sports facilities have been destroyed. And it is only on Ukraine-controlled lands. There are many more in occupied territories. We just don't know the exact numbers.
Another problem is with the International Olympic Committee. So, after the first anniversary of the full-scale war on March 28 this year, it recommended that international sport federations allow athletes from Russia and Belarus to compete in tournaments arranged by the International Olympic Committee. But on February 28 last year, right after the beginning of a full-scale war, in response to the appeal of Ukrainian athletes, the International Olympic Committee recommended that Russians and Belarusians are not allowed to participate in international competitions.
Yes, this is an unprecedented and not expected development in our view, as it is after Bucha, Kherson, Mariupol, and others constant shelling, torture, rape, and kidnapping of our children.
Yes, so in particular, the president of the International Olympic Committee, Thomas Bach, named 6 conditions under which Russians and Belarusian athletes are allowed to compete. So they are not allowed to use their flags. So like literally, they should be represent kind of a neutral team, and those athletes and personnel actively supporting the war, they are not allowed to participate as well. Those athletes who have contracts with the Russian or Belarusian armies cannot compete as well, and others. Only the last point is about sanctions, that they should remain in place, and others.
And what is the result of it?
After that, the international sport federations of table tennis, of taekwondo, and wrestling announced the return of Russian and Belarusian athletes to international tournaments. And at the beginning of March, for example, the International Fencing Federation also decided to get back Russians and Belarusians. So the committee actually proposes to allow Russians and Belarusians to compete under neutral flags.
And there are more and more cases of violation of the rule on a white flag. In January this year, a famous tennis tournament, Australia Open, took place, where Russian athletes were also banned of using their own flag. But their so-called fans have been seen hoisting the Russian flag at the Australia Open.
What is worse, the Russian flag was seen when Ukrainian players were competing. Luckily, Ukraine's public reaction was fast, as Ukraine's ambassador to Australia, Vasily Miroshnichenko, strongly condemned the public display of the Russian flag during the game of the Ukrainian tennis player Katerina Baindil. In my view, what makes all these conversations special is that we should not forget that in February last year, the Russian president actually visited China at the occasion of the Winter Olympic Games. So the plan to attack Ukraine was also discussed there, despite both Russians and Chinese denying the collaboration and any cruel plans. And I recall that the visit to the Olympics was seen as somehow a gesture that the invasion that was more or less in the air, so it was, at least it was seen that it wasn't a real option for Putin, but then we saw that it was completely the opposite. And let me also remind those who think that sport can unite basically one thing. Only in 2018, South Korea and North Korea were able to participate in the Olympics under one flag after the Korean War, which ended in 1953. So it's 65 years after the end of the war. Obviously, we're not talking about making one team with Russians, but this example is a great relevance here. And basically, sorry for long remark, but it is really important to get a sense of this discussion. By the way, Nastya, how do Ukrainian athletes react to those restrictions and to these discussions about returning Russians to the competitions at all?
Yeah, we dig deeper. For example, Ukrainian diver Stanislav Oliferchuk is one of those who unconditionally joined the boycott of competitions with the participation of Russians and or Belarusians. Oliferchuk comes from Mariupol. The Neptune Sports Complex where he trained was repaired just before the Russian invasion, but never got a chance to be opened. And the sportsman had high hopes for these halls, but the Russians destroyed them the same day they destroyed the drama theater building, killing hundreds of civilians who used it as a bomb shelter. We will post the link in the description about with more details.
And another reminder about Mariupol and this basically drama theater is that Russians actually put bombs on it, despite the fact that before the theater it was written on the street, it was written Дети, which means children. So they knew that children were hiding there, and they threw the bomb over there.
But of course, for Ukrainian sportsmen, for whom the preparation for such competition is a big mission of their life, of course, such boycotts and such decisions impacted a lot.
Yeah.
But it's important because such narrative is not only damaging, it is really the first step to business as usual.
Yeah, and it may seem at a first glance the conversation about sport, but it is definitely not just about sport. As Nastya just told, it also, in our view, it also basically jeopardizes support for Ukraine, and it has also a really significant impact on the discussions of sanctions, on the discussion of getting Russians out of international organizations. Again, it's not just about sport. It is just one example, one dimension of this discussion. And in this story that we are referencing to right now, Actually, Bogdan Nikishin, for example, the Olympian and senior coach of the Ukrainian national fencing team, told Rubryka that he's outraged by the statements of the Russian Olympic Committee regarding equal conditions for athletes of all countries. And again, as Nastya has rightly mentioned, they destroyed Ukrainian sport facilities, killed athletes, and now they tell everyone that everyone should be in the same conditions. And of course, it's impossible to talk about equality with Russians, and not to mention even a chance of a Ukrainian athletes competing with Russians on the same court, on the same place, and basically not to mention some possible provocations over there. It can be either from athletes or fans.
Also, the athletes and coach share with journalists of our team that Ukrainian athletes receive support and sympathy from colleagues from France, Germany, Italy, USA. However, when there is a question about specific actions, for example, boycotting competitions with the participation of our enemies, Russians and Belarusians, in this war, they will do what the leaders of their federations or states tell them.
Yeah, and it is again proves the importance of this discussion to understand the context, especially. And also there are some examples that can be a sort of inspiration for Ukrainians and those who support Ukraine. It deals with the Federation of Judo. Actually, we have to admit that the Russian influence on individual federations in this kind of sport, especially such as the International Judo Federation, remains quite high, because some companies like Gazprom and Rosneft, they have been sponsors of this federation for many years. But the Ukrainian team, the Ukrainian federation, overcame this influence last year. Last year, the International Olympic Committee that we have talked about at the beginning, it somehow lifted some technical requirements for Russians, and they were literally allowed to compete in a competition in Mongolia. And Ukraine said it would not participate in this case, and literally the competition was held without Russians, because Ukrainians actually have been protesting about this unfair treatment, unfair competition, and so only after the Russians were officially suspended from this competition, the Ukrainian team was about to start the preparation for these competitions. Yes, Ukrainian athletes missed 3 Olympic qualifications tournaments. They lost some rating points, but the final goal was achieved, and some athletes they are really proud of that. That they showed character, they showed strength, and they continue to represent Ukraine without any damage to Ukrainian support, and they even advocated for more support to Ukraine.
Yes, Rubryka is about solutions, even the full-scale war. So we described and explained the contexts and some examples. So let us suggest how can we keep fighting? How can you help to change the situation? So please actively interact with international sports federations. Maybe share this podcast and your own thoughts about it in social media. Expose Russian and Belarusian athletes who are involved in the security forces of the Russian Federation and the Republic of Belarus. And participate in public campaigns to boycott Russian and Belarusian athletes in the international arena.
Right, and we have seen that there are no really neutral Russians and Belarusians, especially given the fact that Putin said he would transfer some nuclear weapons to Belarus, which is not legal, as Belarus has not signed, for example, any treaty that allows placing nukes in Belarus. So while Russians claim their athletes are innocent and they have been talking about equal treatment, they are just trying to basically divert attention from other issues.
So stay with us and support us at Patreon. It will help us produce more independent podcasting and reporting to you, which will result in more help for Ukraine to win this hard but important war.